Now, school shootings are devastating our country. And no matter what side of the argument you land on, we can all agree that something must change. Young children should not be afraid to go to school.
That's right. In fact, they put metal detectors in at my kid's school this year. That's just, you know, kind of like a mental check.
We should, our schools shouldn't look like the security measures taken at a bank.
So the latest took place in Georgia, where the suspected gunman killed 2 teachers and 2 fellow students and injured 9 others. The suspected father who provided the shooter access to the firearms used is also awaiting trial. Now we're joined by Michigan Attorney Jamie White for his side on this complicated case that I have to say, it reminds me a little of the Oxford shooting.
It absolutely does. There's a lot of parallels here, and that's exactly why we wanted to bring Jamie on the show today, because the situation's also different in some ways. So, Jamie, what a lot of us are hearing is that if we recall with the Oxford school shooter, both parents were held accountable for the shooter's actions. But in this case coming out of Georgia, the alleged shooter, his father is being held accountable, but the mother doesn't seem to be. Why is that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me this morning, guys. And I just want to reiterate what you said in your opening, and that is that something has to be done about this epidemic that we have in our country associated with children shooting their classmates and teachers. But to your direct question, there are certainly some significant similarities between the Crumleys and what occurred most recently in Georgia. The most significant similarity is that the parents were put on notice in both cases that this particular child had mental issues and had designs on actually using a weapon to harm people at a school. As far as, you know, when we get into the distinctions as to why a court charges things the way they do, it's always very, very fact sensitive. In the Crumley case, there appeared to be, you know, having seen the entire trial, we don't know all the facts in Georgia yet, but having seen everything play out in the course of both parents' trials in Michigan, there was little question that these parents acted in concert. If I recall, the only real distinction that existed was that I believe the mom actually took the young man to the gun range just prior to the shooting. But, you know, they acted in concert. They met with the school authorities in concert and appeared to support him having possession of this weapon. And then most importantly, we had in that case what's called flight evidence, which is just a fancy word for trying to get out of Dodge. And, you know, these parents were found with thousands of dollars, I believe located in a warehouse, you know, prior to them ultimately being arrested and turned into the court. In Georgia, we don't know the facts yet, but I think what we could presume is that at least at this point in time, the prosecutor in that jurisdiction has made a distinction that these parties did not act in concert, and the father, in fact, bears a greater amount of responsibility. Now, with that said, prosecutors can always add charges. Mm-hmm. You know, they can take charges away, they can add defendants, and that's not unusual. So I wouldn't say the book is closed as far as mom's culpability, but I think the evidence is going to show that the father played the primary role in providing the weapon, and to what extent I believe it was the FBI that visited the home, to what extent that information was provided to both parents and or the father more so could also play a role. But this is something we're going to see more and more of. Mm-hmm. We've always had the issue of civil liability when it comes to leaving a weapon out and somebody becoming injured. You know, I represented a young woman last year where her uncle had left the weapon out and she had a significant injury as a result of an accidental shooting, and he was ultimately held civilly accountable. What we have now is, whether it be the lack of willpower or the lack of ability on the part of politicians, we now have local law enforcement decision makers, i.e. prosecuting attorneys and district attorneys, saying, we're going to take this matter into our own hands. So I don't think we've seen the last of this. If you know your child is dangerous or has mental health issues and you provide him or her with a weapon, and that in fact does cause injuries to someone or death, I think we're going to see that be part of the checklist as a prosecutor decides as to who they want to hold accountable.
Now, Jamie, in our last minute here, I'd love to hear just any insight you may have on what we can do going forward, because it seems like we're having these conversations way too often.
Yeah, Jill talked about her school having metal detectors. When I was growing up, we didn't have guns in schools, and I suspect you guys didn't either.
No.
However, I lived about an hour and a half from Detroit at that time when I was a young man, and they did have a problem, over a period of time where children were bringing guns to school, and they had metal detectors. So there are different security measures that can be and are being put in place. I can tell you here where I live in mid-Michigan, many of the schools have one entrance, and in order to enter the building, you have to press a button. There's a camera. You identify yourself. You're allowed in. And then we have the more, what I would call dramatic resolutions that are being discussed, such as arming teachers, something that I don't necessarily think will solve the problem. But each jurisdiction has its own politics, but something has to be done, and we're seeing incremental steps along the way, such as Jill discussed at her children's school. Perfect.
Jamie, again, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insight on this incredibly complicated case, and I know we'll be touching base with you again the more information comes out about this. Jamie White, local attorney here in Michigan, thank you so much, and you have a good day, sir.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
You too.
Thank you.